also into his religion and caused him to associate all of his better deities with the solar powers. Little by little, art fashioned religion, and in a sense, religion matured art. And we have today very few great religions that have not, to some measure at least, formed a fraternity with artists. This love of art, this expression of spiritual conviction through art, has been our heritage and our legacy from time immemorial. Gradually, in the Middle Ages, particularly, man began to devastate his earth more and more. Wars in Europe particularly mutilated the great cathedrals and cities and towns. Following this period came the gradual rise of industrialism, the creation of great cities, the building of factories with their tall chimneys cutting across the sky. By degrees, man lost his direct contact with nature. It remained only to the agricultural groups and a few other minority bodies to keep this contact. Most of our peoples today have only an occasional contact with nature itself. They live in the congestion and haste of our particular tempo. Even when we go out into nature, we go in a hurry. We see very little, and what we do see is constantly mutated by human activities. So unless we want to make a real pilgrimage into some distant place, unless we want to backpack into the mountains or something of that nature, we have only an occasional glimpse of the better part of nature. And now the industrial smogs of our cities shorten our horizon, and we see very little of the grandeur that was once the common property of mankind. In the building of our cities and in the planning of our various industrial institutions, for a long time the only consideration was utility. Cities had a tendency to accumulate. It was rare indeed that one was actually planned. Even if it was planned, in the course of time the plan was forgotten in the cause of utility. Most of the cities that we now inhabit particularly represent the confusion of our Western way of life. We mingle in the architecture of each community many styles, appropriate and not appropriate, largely according to the fashion of the owner or perhaps to the prevailing trend in architectural designing. Little by little, we have become style conscious. We recognize only a strange, individualized conformity. We want to be like everyone else, but still we want to be different in some way. But in our interest in being different, we are rather nervous and hesitant. We do not want to be too different. If we break away too far from the conventional patterns of things, we feel that we open ourselves to criticism. It seems therefore best to follow in these patterns, and little by little, schools of architectural structuring have come into existence. These schools merely represent groups of persons. Some of them have studied from each other, some have merely studied the general plan of things. But these schools of not always inspired draftsmen have contributed most of our modern city planning. As a result, we tear down the old and build the new, and always we do this with little consideration for the essential values of things. We tear down what we no longer regard as safe or appropriate or in harmony with existing styles. Then we build into a great conformity, and I strongly suspect that America is facing a gradual and inevitable reaction to this conformity. One of these days we're going to rebel. We're going to be very tired of cracker box and glass buildings. We're going to be very tired of an artless modern architectural economy. Most people argue this point considerably. One group will look at the United Nations building, which looks like a large block of ice in New York, and they'll say, here is great creative design. The creative design is an absolutely basic, fundamental rectangle, and that is all. They're telling us about the great, pure sweeps of line. How this building rises in all the majesty of reinforced concrete. That never before have we broken away from the foibles. Here is a great, primitive, massive artistry, just about as dramatic and inspiring as an orange crate. But we are told that this is the way it must be now. This is the way things are. And so these great buildings rise, cutting off our views of mountains and rivers and valleys. We throw various bridges across rivers for purposes of utility. We need them, we have to have them, no one questions it. And so little by little we create an immense spider web of hodgepodge. And while it's all perhaps reasonably efficient until the congestion gets so great that we can't get around, still something has been lost. Something that is important to the human being. In the modern trend of things, we feed men, we doctor them, we pension them, and we bury them, and consider that we have in this way fulfilled all of our duties. It never seems to occur to us that man is alive, that he is some more than merely part of a passing show, that in some way man has rights. And one of the rights that he has is the right to beauty. He needs it. And where we fail to provide this, something happens to the man. Now we can excuse all these processes any way that we want to. We can keep on boasting of simple living and things of that nature, and perhaps we will have to endure the modern tendency towards cliff dwelling for another 100 years. But someday we're going to find that utility is not really satisfied by this procedure. That the greater utility is overlooked. We know, every expert on the subject tells us, that congested areas are the breeding places of crime. We know that the individual who lives always in the strange confusion of unplanned existence suffers as the result. As neighborhoods decline, as their structures are neglected and become no longer suitable really for tenancy, we observe also that the psychology of that neighborhood declines. And in these places where all beauty has faded from the environment, morality fades in the lives of the people. They struggle on, but there is less and less of strength to support them. And in the course of time, they even forget beauty entirely. They do not even know that they need it. They continue their small cycles of humdrum existence with the strange monotony of the unbeautiful pressing in upon them all the time. Add to this type of condition the tremendous pressure of speed, the high tension of living, and we have all of the ingredients necessary for a collective breakdown, nervous, emotional, mental, and physical. This type of situation has become consistently worse in the last century. Most of the great cities of Europe are old and many of them are neglected. The cities in this country were created by persons whose roots originated in some European culture. They came over here from different countries and brought with them a subtle longing for the things they had left behind. Perhaps they did not fully consciously know this. But when the time came for them to build, if they had any say about it, they incorporated something of the old country. And if they couldn't put it in the building, they certainly included it in the furnishings. They wanted to live some way in the comfort and consolation of familiar things. Well, when the cultures of 200 different culture groups come together in the melting pot of a great city, you have no plan, you have no order, you have only confusion. Now, the great art critic will tell you that if each of these groups had brought with them the best of their own culture, the best of their own art, the highest aspects of their own architecture, and had built according to a full appreciation of their own cultural heritage, the cities would have been diverse, that is true, but there would have been great underlying harmonies. For all that is really good in beauty is comparable with all else. And the true beauty of a great Chinese house is in no way in conflict with the simple dignity and grandeur of a Tudor mansion. Wherever we find the great survival of art tradition, we find compatibility. But that again is influenced very largely by the economic situation. The cultures that we have here in the West were for the most part not the result of wealth. They were people of very moderate means who could not build the best. They could not do the things that restored in their consciousness the noblest part of their foreign heritage. They had to economize. They had to do things as simply as possible. They had to substitute a rather poor caricature for a noble original. These do not work together. These do not have any basic harmony in them. Little by little, all of this confusion certainly has influenced the aesthetics of Western man. From the general standpoint of things, the last 100 years have been the most sterile in Western art. Something has happened not only to the art, but to the artist. And that is because it happened to him that it was expressed in all of the things that he created. And as cities increased, as the problems of industry became stronger, as competitive economics took over, the struggle for existence became too important. It dominated every other consideration. This struggle for existence gave little time, little means, little encouragement to the development of any truly national art. We are a country without an art. We are a country whose artistic roots are in every other part of the world except here. The only thing that we can really say is our own is the artistry of the American Indian tribes of North, Central, or South America. But this artistry is not really our own. It is the art of the indigenous. It is the art of the people who were here when we came. We did not understand them when we arrived, and we haven't improved the relations very much since that time. So this art also is strange to us essentially. It is natural only because it belongs to the earth, not because it belongs to the people who live here. With this lack of systematizing of our creative impulses, we have spawned a number of schools of neo-psychotic art. This does not mean that all Western art is bad. I don't want to give that impression. The trouble seems to be that most Western art that is good is not Western. That's just the difficulty with it. It is from somewhere else. The artist, when no one was looking, peeked into some ancient book from China, India, or Japan, and came out with a new house plan. He did not develop it from his own creativity. Now, there will be a great number of persons who will nod their heads sympathetically at this thought, and then will explain that is why we must break away, why we must have something new and wonderful and different and magnificent. This is undoubtedly true. No one's going to debate it. But how are we going to break away? Who is going to make this break? The individual, after 2,000 years of artistic deprivation, decides he's going to break away. What has he within himself? Where is his own sense of beauty? What has happened to it? Well, he perhaps is one of those persons who never had any opportunity to integrate a sense of beauty. All through the period of his schooling, he never got any further in the adoration of the beautiful than perhaps a few classes in drawing, in which he copied milk bottles, pictures, and an occasional wilted flower. This was his art training. Perhaps he then decided that he really needed something better, so he went to one of the schools or academies and enrolled. Here he found himself in the midst of a mass of confusion exactly like his own, presided over by teachers who were perhaps a little bit further advanced in integration than himself, but also were under the broad mantle of the prevailing confusion. Thus, the great creativity that we longed for did not arrive. And here we go right back to the Greeks and to the other people that we have mentioned. When the Greeks wanted to build a temple, where did they get the inspiration? They got it from their environment. They probably based their first temples upon the sacred groves where their deities were supposed to dwell. Here there were wonderful fountains flowing by natural law. Here there were great trees, and perhaps some pious person of long ago had built a shrine or altar there. From this shrine, standing in the midst of the trees, came the altars of great cathedrals, and also the altars of the great temples of Zeus and Athena and other of the deities of antiquity. The simple point being that the Greek brought into his art that which was familiar to him. So we now transpose ourselves into the present culture, and we say this is the only way it can be done. You have to bring into your art the experience of your own life. And the result today is something that very strikingly resembles a Spanish omelet that failed. Many of these pictures have been hung upside down in galleries with not even the artist knowing the difference. After he had painted it, he spent weeks trying to find a name for it, and very often gave up with something like study in X. He didn't know what to call it even. But it expressed himself, and the new great art was the art of self-expression. It was an art based upon what we like to term realism. And the combination of self-expression and realism, for the most part today, is rather morbid. Self-expression is meaningless unless the self is capable of expressing. And even if it is capable of expressing, what is it going to express? It is going to express experience. It is going to tell the story of itself in some way. It is going to tell the story of its childhood, of the house it lives in, and the street where it first played. It is going to tell the story of its education and its struggles, its convictions, and perhaps its rebellions. It is going to sum up with its own summary of life as it has known or experienced that life. And as the life of the average Western person is very confused, as it is made up largely of objections and pressures and stress and antagonisms and futilities and great fixations of attitudes. This is what we have in art. This is what we have in music. This is now what we have in literature. All our creative expression is telling the story of cities, of houses that have nothing in common, of freeways, of the tension and stress of motion, of the tremendous pressures of economic survival, of the problems of social adjustment, which often demands a tremendous sacrifice of personal integrity. Out of this kind of a situation, it is perfectly natural that we should decide that modern art could well express us if we use such mediums as broken up automobile crankcases in order to assemble a statue. This is our experience of life. Now, this experience of life, as revealed in the experience of art, should be a tremendous educational factor. It should warn us of the impoverishment of our own values. It should warn us also that we have lost individual acceptances. People are spending vast sums of money for this material. Obviously, some hope to make a good investment, and I think this is now the leading factor in art selection. It is not whether it is good or whether it is suitable. It is whether it will double in price in the next 20 years. This itself, of course, is a sacrilege, but it is the inevitable reaction of many factors. The person trying to choose how he shall spend or invest his money becomes close-minded. He hopes that he will at least reclaim his investment if he invests in art or something of that nature. If he invests in a car, he has no expectation of reclaiming anything. But art is different. Art is luxury, and luxury should be able to at least capitalize. All this attitude runs through our way of life, constantly, affecting everything that we think and believe. So we have today a mass of art produced by individuals who are the products of our way of life. And this rather morbid generation of so-called realism has a following. There are people who could not possibly paint one of these peculiar productions, who will turn around and see in it some deep and wonderful rapport to their own soul. This is because the artist and the purchaser both grew up in the same neighborhood. And the one is depicting and the other is accepting. The individual who has had this rather unhappy type of life sort of resents gay art. It's sort of an indictment of some kind. Perhaps it makes it long for those mountains and the streams that you cannot go back to. And as a result, happy, pleasant things are not acceptable to miserable people. And so, in a sense, art becomes a justification of personal conduct. Art becomes a philosophy of realism. It contributes to defeatism if it is defeatist art. And the person who has taken as his basic key in life that nobody is any good naturally admires an artist who has the same conception. So these pictures may be purchased, sometimes they are hung in the home for a while anyway, and the individual is further indoctrinated with the negation. Little by little, art which might be a window out into a nobler realm simply becomes another wall, taking away from the individual one of his most cherished and most immediately available patterns of idealism. So in this situation we all live, and I think we all come gradually to sense the need for something that gives us a restatement of faith in ourselves, in our fellow human beings, in the direction of our way of life. We would like to really and honestly believe that there are people who still cherish true beauty, who still believe in a world that is essentially good, even though they are not able always to demonstrate this scientifically. We like to feel that somewhere hope has a proper place in our program of culture. But it is not enough for us to turn to the fascination of science, to the endless accumulation of gadgets and gimmicks. We need something basic, something that ties us to nobility, inspires us to the grandeur of the human possibility. Actually today there are great numbers of persons in Western civilization, and I believe also elsewhere, who have no longer any real faith in the dignity of life. They do not believe except to oblivion. They have no vision of this wonderful truth that man can break through this nostalgia that he suffers from if he wants to. That all these styles and all these patterns and all this propaganda and promotion of the commonplace, all this is simply a mental attitude. It is not a reality. It is a passing fancy. It will be buried in some ancient geological strata for future man to consider. These situations that we know are not real. They are not inevitable. And this state of disillusionment is not universal truth, just because a great many persons believe it to be true. It is the product of this constant pressure of a negative or a meaningless environment upon an individual who is not very well oriented in his own right. Something here has to become strong. And today we look for this strength. We simply do not find it. The individual is not taught to be strong. He is not taught to honor the honorable. He drifts along, gaining technical knowledge in some chosen field, but his inner life is totally neglected. The division in Western culture, resulting from the Protestant Reformation, it meant that until very recent years, most Protestant churches were completely devoid of art. They had this charm of perhaps a colonial structure and a pleasant little steeple rising on the corner. But as works of art, these buildings were comparatively meaningless. The individual went into a bare building with pews and a very plain altar. Here you receive such instruction as might be expected from the square-toed Puritanism. There was nothing of beauty in the development of religion until architecture began to take over and a certain maturing quality arose, and persons desperately desirous of some creative expression resolved to improve the beauty of their churches. This has been generous since that time. We've had some very charming and delightful buildings. But here again is interesting. The man who designed the church had just finished designing a factory. He did the best he could, but he was not trained in the creation of sacred structures. He did not know the importance of the symbolism of religious buildings. He did not know how to use the elements of form to create mood. These buildings are charming, but for the most part they're not very important religiously. They are far better than what preceded them, but they have not yet become involved or built into a science of spiritual relaxation through structure, through environment, through confronting the individual with the orderly picture or the orderly symbol of a great faith. These structures, therefore, are not accomplishing the maximum, although they are certainly an improvement over what we had up until 150 years ago. Realizing, as we must today, that the momentum of industrialism, the momentum of political, social, religious, racial, cultural confusion, this momentum will be very difficult to break in the terms of a national program. We have to wait for the country or the world to wake up to spiritual value. We may have quite a long wait. The need of the individual, however, still remains. Unfortunately, we can meet that need. The person must make his own plan. He must set himself his own program of how to make beauty a living force in his own life. His most basic pattern, of course, is to try to reestablish the psychological communion with nature itself. For the most part, this is not practical, however, to modern man. He cannot do it. His responsibilities and the heavy pressure of his business life will make it very hard for him to have more than an occasional contact with the natural world to which he belongs. He may make a vacation to Sequoia Park and see the great trees there. He may have a weekend in Yosemite. But this type of thing is not the answer to the real pleasure of cultural need. Those few days in the presence of beauty were not enough. He came without preparation. The first week or two would be only an adjustment, a letting down, and by that time he's gone. So here we have a very hard problem in restoring people to nature unless they choose to live in some comparatively remote and inaccessible place. The next best thing is to try to bring art more closely into personal life, to bring it into the home, to bring it into the personal life of the individual. Here, of course, there are other difficulties that have to be considered. The one fact remains: the average person can organize and integrate the space in which he lives. He can do something to make it as nearly as possible an important influence in his life. To do this, he must fashion this space himself. There is no use trying to hire a professional to create artistry in your home. All the professional can do is to create the artistry he would like. He will be quite sincere, perhaps, and rather expensive. But he will give you what he considers to be right. And this is the same thing on the aesthetic level as another person telling you what your religion ought to be. It is not really satisfactory. It is something, perhaps, that can never find sensitive correlation in your own heart. It may be why these expensive decorating jobs are nearly always annual. For the individual who does not feel comfortable, so he tries to try it over again. The only real answer is to create gradually an environment that comes the nearest to your own conviction, and at the same time to give effort and thought to the enrichment of that conviction. Art begins with conviction and its value in the life of the individual. It arises from the fact that whatever pattern he sets up, he believes it to be better. He feels that in some way it is a vital force in his personal growth. Nearly serious neurotics are without any type of artistic conviction. It is one of the most common causes, apparently, of the breakdown of human integrity. Conviction, reflected from your walls, from your furniture, from everything that you have, is a strength when you need it. Conviction is something that is constantly going into your consciousness through your eyes and doing something for you or to you according to the nature of it. So if you have some interest in these matters and would like to gain at least the support of beauty, the support of something fine in your own life, then certainly it is important enough to you to be worth perhaps a year of rather careful study, in which you no longer take it for granted that your taste is good. It may be better than the average, but it may not be as good as it could be for you. This depends on how much energy and thought and time you have given it. If you are a serious person, if you're really striving for answers to basic problems, it already indicates that you have the capacity for inner development, that you can release through yourself your very attitude basically of desire for self-improvement carries with it the answer to its own needs. It is not impossible for any person who is sensitive enough to know that he should improve to use the various means available to assist in this improvement. First of all, I think the average person, artistically speaking, should work with his personal immediate environment, whether it is a house or an apartment or a single room. Do something with it. Become an artist. Take the walls of this enclosure, which is your particular place in this world, and do something with this enclosure to make it a center of growth and beauty and enlightenment for yourself. It's really worth a great deal to do this. A person can spend several years taking painting lessons and become a little better at it. But you also find that in putting pictures picture thoughts onto paper or cloth or something of that nature, it is producing individual works of art. With the same artistry, you can create a three-dimensional picture in which to live, his own immediate environment. You can start in by probably simplifying. While we all have to start with, in art, particularly in picture designing, is the blank sheet of paper or canvas. Which we have to start with. And as the Eastern painter points out, the first line is very dangerous. Because in that one simple stroke of the brush, you have destroyed forever the plain white piece of paper. So you better do something important with it. Or else you simply mutilated it. In your case, perhaps the plain sheet of paper constitutes the four walls of your apartment or house or the rooms. Naturally, we do not expect Western man to live without furnishings. He has to do something to make this stroke upon the blank sheet of paper. Now, many individuals, under the sudden pressure of a great illumination, throw out everything they have and accumulate a new stock that's worse. This doesn't do anything. Do not be in a growing hurry, but begin to estimate very carefully what needs to be done. What are your attitudes towards what you already have? Is that little cupboard over there a priceless gem because it belonged to grandfather? Is this other little thing that you picked up for a tenth of its merit precious largely because it's a bargain? What have you done in the gathering of what you have? Has it accumulated? Has it been left over to previous establishments of different sizes, shapes, and proportions? Is it something that was there when you rented it furnished? What is the source of this miscellaneous life you have? Obviously, if you live in a furnished apartment or a furnished flat, you are not permitted to throw out the furniture. But then you have to work within the areas of the possible, always working towards something of greater value. No individual should ever live in a house unless he has read at least one book on good home furnishing. He should never simply allow a furniture store to plan it for him. He certainly should not depend upon some room set up in a department store to indicate how the items of furniture will fit together. We should not eliminate the need for personal expression. We should have things that are comfortable. To live in misery for the sake of style is foolishness. It serves no one any good. It turns the home into an inquisitional dungeon. These things you have to think through. And a little moderate thinking on how things should be done will always be profitable. There are inexpensive books in great number today which specialize various types of furnishings and homes. You can look them over. You can study them over. You can find out if possible why they were arranged that way. Do not copy them, but try to gain an insight into the essential symbols that must be grouped together to create a home. If you do this carefully, if you are watchful and thoughtful, if you do not create a hodgepodge as the result of all your friends telling you how to do it, you may end up finally with something that is rather important. That is, a place which expresses you. Now, if it expresses you, it may have a few things wrong with it. Let's face that. Because you're not too sure that you are going to express the best of you immediately. You cannot. A person who loves art has to evolve. And the paintings that he bought at 20 are not the paintings he will love at 60, unless he was an awfully wise 20-year-old. For the most part, we do outgrow things, and this is good. We outgrow them because our own taste and our own insight is enriched by experience. So we have to change things. You may have it the way you want it of a Monday, and it will not please you of a Wednesday. This is all right. This does not mean that you were wrong. It means that you have grown. And when you outgrow something, do not cling desperately to it for sentimental reasons or because it cost you too much in the first place. Do not cramp yourself by forcing your growth to be halted and accommodate itself to some previous situation. This is why in the beginning it is best to choose sparsely only those things which seem to be essential and necessary. As you go along, if you have only limited means to change your environment, simplify it, get rid as far as you can of discords, and try to understand the symbolism of the things that you have. Try to see whether the sofa, which belongs to one level of American culture, matches the standing chair, which may belong to an entirely different level. And for all sake, do not match the chair to the sofa when you're not even sure the sofa is any good. It is one of these problems where there is a tremendous education in art, even in furnishing one room. Keep it simple. Realize that order is best evident and best acceptable by consciousness when it is not obscured by too many trimmings. Keep it simple. Never fail to include light and air as part of the decoration of the room. Try to find color harmonies and things of that nature which enrich you, that make life happier and more gracious for you. But always also remember that if it is right, if what you have finally decided upon is correct, everyone else who comes in will feel this same graciousness. Your environment will express you instead of fighting with you all the time. Every room, every home, every place where we live should have art. But this is not always easy, particularly as collectors become more numerous, values become greater, and one shudders at the prospect of trying to buy a Rembrandt for $2 million, except a person of very great means. So we cannot have these great treasures. And this causes us sometimes to take the attitude that as long as we cannot have the best, we do not need anything. Art seems still to be listed by most people as part of the luxuries of the wealthy, instead of being recognized for what it is, an absolute necessity of the average person. But if it is not possible to expend a vast sum in art, there are points we can remember here also. Normally, it is not wise for great art to be placed in a private home. It is not good that the unique product of extraordinary genius should be subject to the vicissitudes of the private lives of persons. The house may burn down. We lost hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of art not long ago in a fire here in California. It is not good that these things of extraordinary value should be improperly cared for, perhaps neglected, very often subjected to unusual wear and tear by private families. What we are looking for is not this terribly expensive thing, but the gracious thing that the average person can have. And usually it ends by the art taking over. If one really fine piece of art comes into a family, or into a home, or into a room, it will gradually dictate its own environment. It will demand certain things. It will indicate clearly that it is not happy if the environment is improper. And the art may therefore take your place as the critic of your environment, demanding certain beauties, certain abilities, certain integrities as requisite to its own comfort in that particular environment. So it's nice to have the idea, at least, of having something of art value. Now, very often, the individual who loves art does collect things. He collects often many different items, which perhaps are essentially disassociated, but can still be brought into an association through the inner life of the person becoming great enough to enclose them all within its consciousness. If such a thing happens, the individual may have material with which to build already his art consciousness. One thing that we learn from the Oriental is the importance of not confusing space with an overwhelming display of things. Every once in a while you see one of these cozy little rooms in which the interior decorator has taken 15 or 20 pictures, framed them similarly, and then put them together in a jigsaw puzzle over the sofa. The important thing is to keynote your environment with something that to you is the most beautiful and the most gracious thing you can imagine. If it is only a reproduction because you cannot afford the original, that is not too important. It is better, however, to have an original even if it is a simple thing, if you can have it, because it usually carries certain values that are lost in even the best lithographic processes that we have developed. But regardless, it must be a keynote. And if you have many things, you have a number of things that you enjoy, then the best thing is to follow the Eastern way of having a little storage closet or a little chest or a little box in which you keep these things. And in sequences or in rhythms or according to your mood, bring them out one at a time. Change some of the art to meet some particular mood that arises in you. But do not attempt to put several different moods on the wall at the same time. They only confuse, they make life harder. We don't know what is happening. Most people do not know. But it has been demonstrated that by degrees, a good art, a good piece of art, a good example of some legitimate creative art by a proper artist does help to civilize the human soul. It helps to restore value. I would say that whatever you have for your own soul's good should be idealistic. Do not take something that dramatizes or attempts to justify the negations of human life. Do not allow whatever it is to be mediocre, because this is what we are all trying to escape from, is mediocrity. which means nothing more or less than sameness with everything else that is not very good. What we really want is inspiration, something to lift us, renew us, rededicate us, or at least to give us the experience of knowing that there is something good there all the time. So in our art appreciation, we should try to choose something that inspires. Now, I know many persons to whom the great roar of the ocean is very inspiring. A wonderful seascape, or a landscape, or a mountain picture becomes another window on the wall of a house. It opens the way to a world we have all longed for. A world that is part of our subconscious and has been ever since we were created. So very often, something that opens the wall brings to us, or close to us, the wonder of a region which is almost divine to us, a region in which God rules his world. The one thing that's very important if you have such a picture is that it should have proper light. Pictures must receive this light of grace upon themselves. Hung badly, the greatest picture loses 90% of its majesty. So it should be well lighted. Our custom in the West usually is a more ornate framing than we have in Asiatic countries. But if this seems to enrich it, if the picture then becomes a precious jewel in a beautiful setting, that is our Western experience, and it is best to leave it that way till we change our own minds. But certainly, if it is a noble subject, we instinctively would like to ennoble it in proper framing. But most important is the light. The light must cause this painting to be as near as possible the expression of nature. As the scene was lit with the light of the sun, so we must bring a little artificial sun into the house and light it appropriately. Very often such a type of lighting has very interesting possibilities. By using a small and comparatively economical bulb, for most paintings, unless very large, do not need a very great-sized illumination. A light perhaps in one of the typical little painting lights, which is placed over it with a protective metal cover to keep the light from going in the wrong direction. If this is tied to a small circuit somewhere, persons who live alone can leave this light on when they go out. And when they come back later in the evening and open the door of their room, the first thing they see is the soft lighted picture of something that is beautiful. This is a welcome into a house which may otherwise be deserted. These things help in some mysterious way. They help to create and preserve this atmosphere of the wonderful, which we all have to experience in order to keep balance in this very complicated age. Some persons prefer religious subjects to landscapes. They prefer perhaps a beautiful religious painting, an icon, or something that has to do with the sacred faiths of the world. Perhaps they would enjoy the marvelous interior of a cathedral, or any object that seems to suggest particularly religious devotion. Others find great comfort and happiness through flowers and still life that seems to give them something of the quietude and the stillness, a beautiful form that does not press on to any particular achievement. Very few people like art that indoctrinates too heavily, but they want to know in some way that this art is honorable, that it came from a person who really loved what he painted or what he drew, something that really gives us a sense of man's faith in man, and not his disillusionment in himself and everyone else. So you can gradually build around some such an artistry as this, the pleasant things of life. The next time you buy a set of dishes, think about it a little more. Try to find something that expresses, even if you cannot get them for 49 cents in a coupon. Try to sacrifice a little more and get something that means something. That you can say to yourself, as the Chinese do when they feel a cup or a dish, that it has a feeling, that it has a warmth to it, that its food seems to be a little nicer on that kind of a dish. Do not be careless of these things, because actually, if you are going to try to find the sensitive help of art, you are doing it not just to possess things, but to give consolation to your consciousness. You are looking for some way to give the God feeling in you an expression. And you have to be prepared to make a sacrifice, perhaps. A sacrifice of some more expensive pattern, in order to get this consciousness, this sense of the essential rightness of things. The same with all these different problems that come up in connection with artistry. You have to not only take it in, but you have to express it. As most persons are not capable of expressing through such creativity as painting or sculpturing, they express everything in simpler ways. And here again, the Asiatic gives us a wonderful lesson. The great artist who paints in terms of a little garden. He has given just as much thought and skill to this as any Leonardo. But he didn't use a brush. He used rocks and sand and green things. He did not model with a chisel. He very carefully and gently put these things together, expressing, however, an artistry just as mature as that of the greatest painter or sculptor of Western tradition. So we create expressive art in various ways. And one way that we can express our creativity is through our environment, through our selection of clothing or adornment, or through the types of things that interest us, and perhaps through some hobby or craft that has become important as a term of self-expression. But we are looking for the artist. We are trying to release the artist in ourselves. And if we do this systematically, we will have a tremendous spiritual satisfaction. Too many persons do not know what to do with a quiet evening. So the first thing they have to do is kill the quietude. It is too oppressive. Here's another field for the development of art consciousness and art appreciation. Today, as perhaps never before in history, books on fine art are available. It seems as though the world has risen to this need. There's perhaps no indication of our need and hunger and starvation for art more clear and direct than the present selling of books in this area. We used to have a few well-honored old volumes on art, and every family library should have at least one. But today it is entirely different. These books are magnificent things, illustrated in color, reproducing for our approval the art treasures of the whole world. Great paintings, great ceramics, great textiles, lacquer work, marvelous sculpturing. The treasures of the Louvre, the British Museum, or the Vatican are all available to us, and also most of the great art treasures of Asia. It's nothing anymore for these books to be published at considerable prices, and they're out of print almost immediately. The American public today is absorbing tens of thousands of volumes, probably hundreds of thousands of volumes, of art books, ranging in price from $10 a volume up. And it is not at all unusual to see these books priced at $25, $35, or $50 a copy. And if you go back the next day, it's gone. The demand for this seems to be a subtle indication of man's need. Books like this would not have sold and could not have sold 50 years ago. But man is looking subconsciously for this type of thing. He is more interested than ever before. And in these fine volumes, some of which incidentally are available in inexpensive reprints so that you are not left out in the cold, they can be had either used or through the public library or in popular reprints, by which the individual can spend a quiet evening, many quiet evenings, simply moving through the beauty of the world, the beauty of human endeavor. And there is nothing that restores man's faith in man more quickly than to see how man has sacrificed and dedicated and suffered and died in martyrdom and poverty simply to preserve beauty, to make things more wonderful, to leave behind some marvelous picture or work of art that would bring joy and consolation to hearts for centuries to come. This type of thing offers a very wonderful mellowing experience to the individual. It is the correct therapy for the daily paper. It is the proper corrective to the commonplace thinking that is forced in upon us all the time. We pick up the newspaper and read of more crimes. But then we can also pick up a marvelous book showing the magnificent achievements of Michelangelo. This was a great soul, a soul that was perhaps tortured, a soul that did not achieve all things well, that we understand, but had certainly a great inner consciousness of beauty, and has left us imperishable monuments. This was a striving soul, seeking perhaps to outgrow its own littleness, but achieving much for the benefit of mankind, like a great musician or a great composer. These flashes of the divine in man come to us in thousands of colored pages today. The works of monks of Mount Athos, the remaining paintings of the ancient Greek temples, the wonders of the sculpturing of Egypt. Everywhere we see these great arts dedicated in some way to the ennoblement of the world, to making structures more beautiful, to decorate the tombs of the illustrious dead, to honor the living gods. These great works of art we have available to us, and they can help us and they can strengthen us in the rededication of our own lives. They help us to orient. They do much more for us than the passing situations that arise, and we can gain certainly much more from a few hours with these beautiful things than we could possibly gain in the same time in a motion picture show or watching a television program. These programs bring us back to the earth. Great art raises us to heaven. So there's a little need of this raising up of life at all times. Most religions have developed strong art programs, and their artistry has been one of their greatest converting powers and their sustaining powers. So this artistry brings man new confidence in man, a new confidence in the mysterious universe which the great artist tries to interpret. So I would say that every person who really is interested in religion should realize that philosophy by itself just doesn't accomplish the end. You can read great books of wisdom, and they're good, there's no doubt of it. You can read scholarly studies and comparative religion and ethics and all the different faiths of men. But it's rather good today that most of the books are illustrated. It is very important to also give beauty a natural expression. One of our troubles, I think, in this world from the beginning is that we have continuously tried to civilize the mind and have done nothing with the emotions. The emotions have never been subjected to any training. We can put the mind in school, and we can teach it reading, writing, and arithmetic. We don't always succeed, but we can try. But where do we send the emotions to school? The emotions are just exactly as powerful, maybe even more powerful than the mind. We have to try to educate the emotions by living alone. We do not educate the emotions by any particular program. Perhaps the nearest program that we have is religion. But this, again, is to most persons not a very intensive course. They take it rather easily at this time especially. So emotions, which for the most part vitalize thoughts, because an individual looks for the answer to a problem because he feels the problem. And the mind is only a sort of servant of emotional pressure. What the emotions want, the mind tries to figure out how to get. But most of our dynamic is emotional, and most of it is completely untrained. We cannot actually head on into the emotions and tell them what to do, because they won't do it even if we do. The individual wants to be angry is not going to be stopped by the most beautiful, peaceful remarks that anyone else can make. You have to gradually mature these emotions. And you do not mature them even if you are studying art. If you devote your attention primarily to identifying artists or schools of art, or spend all your time trying to figure out who the saint is represented by the icon, this doesn't any more than give further exercise to the mind. The thing that helps from an aesthetic standpoint is simply to relax and accept the beauty of the art, to sense its emotional warmth, its emotional directive, always working toward the emotion of sublimity, the emotion of a tremendous sense of goodness, an emotion of reverence, just simply the emotion of a child who holds out their hands to something that is pretty and says, "I like it." It is this acceptance emotionally of beauty in its own value, not by rationalization, but because it does something to make life happier. If you can use art in this way, it will help a great deal. And I have heard recently something that I think is quite interesting. A move to include art in the furnishings of hospitals. This has been something that has been desperately needed for years. We are tired out of this completely sanitary room, whitewashed. In this very sanitary room that does not have one single evidence of human warmth, for fear it will carry a germ. In this, many people are born. Others suffer great pain. And in this whitewashed walls, others die. Without any beauty, without anything to give real grace to the... Well, perhaps in those days it was difficult because it was hard to clean bric-a-brac. But at the same time now we have sterile lights, by means of which it is possible to put anything in a room you want to, and it will still be sterile. But it is better to have it sterile of bacteria than sterile of existence. So we can today begin to think in terms of art, beauty, natural art, something that will give pleasure to the sufferer. He may not even see the art, but if it is there, he will know it. It will do something to his subconscious. Doctors are doing the same thing with their offices, and there is more and more interest in what might be termed psychological art. For offices of physicians, psychologists, mentalists of various kinds. Art that helps the individual to recover, even while he's waiting for the session. Something to bring beauty closer and closer to us. Let us not be satisfied with this streamlined efficiency that we have liked to call beauty. The clean line, which is clean of any meaning also. Let us rather try to think of something in terms of grace, to counteract the sterility of our way of life with the great fertility of our own insight. So I think that it is very good and important to constantly remind thoughtful persons of the need of art. I talked to a Japanese dealer, when I was in Kyoto, and he said to me, about 9 out of 10 people who come in to buy art are women. I said, how do you explain that? Oh, he said, I think from what I've heard listening to customers, it's because men think that art is effeminate. Well, there may be a certain point there. That they would like to keep at least their artistic interests in their wife's name. They feel foolish going in looking at prints. They feel foolish handling small art objects. They think some way it detracts from this magnificent masculinity, which, if the truth were known, most of them don't have in the first place. Actually, however, most of the world's greatest artists have been men. This is an interesting cross point. It's like the great chef, nearly always a man. It means that men have certain attitudes about these things. Another attitude that prevails is that the man feels that the decoration of the house is his wife's part of life. But certainly they can get together on it on some basis. If they can live together, they can enjoy beauty together. So a man who has so much rather rugged economic pressure at the moment is perhaps the best candidate for art. And there is art all over the world that is strong enough and powerful enough and dynamic enough to hold his attention. He may not be so good on some of the most sensitive, abstract subjects, but the great art of the world was created, most of it by men, for both men and women. And the world can all appreciate it. And you'd be surprised how much great art is appreciated by small children. So in this area, there is nothing really too serious to detract. The journey in search of beauty is often a wonderful hobby in life. The haunting of places where lovely things might be found. These make better reasons for living, certainly, than the humdrum way in which so many persons spend their years. So the drama of art becomes the drama of value. It becomes the power gradually to detect merit. It becomes the constant unfolding of consciousness. All these things together make it a tremendously dramatic field and a wonderful outlet for persons who otherwise are in very routine situations. If they have much time, they can do many things. If they have little time, they can still spend a few minutes in the evening studying some type of art that particularly delights them, learning to know its value, know its meaning, why it is good, and perhaps finally coming to the point where they can compare their own intuition with the judgment of the expert. These things all add up to a wonderful experience, and they certainly will help to bring release and variety to living. We are too cramped. The wealthiest people in the world, with more of almost everything available to us than any other nation possesses, we are unable to find happiness because we have never linked happiness with beauty. We have never made it a part of our lives to be observant of the tremendous message of nature as it is interpreted by great art. The artist sometimes does a little censoring work for us. He takes away a few trees and makes the landscape more beautiful. This is his skill. He is trying to give us the best balanced composition. The Greeks realized that the perfect mathematical balance of a picture was geometrical, and that this geometry was directly available to the human soul, which functions, as Plato pointed out, as a geometrical entity. As God geometrizes, so the human soul is particularly happy, or rejoices, as the Greeks would say, in being brought into the presence of geometrical order. A perfectly composed picture pleases you because mathematically it is correct. Mathematics are the bones of art, upon which the artist builds various flesh and clothing. But everything in great art is orderly. It is something that gives confidence, gives courage, gives integrity, and rejoices the soul, because the soul perceives in great beauty the similitude of itself. So with all this type of thinking, with our searching for truth in many different areas, let us always remember the importance of the search for growth through beauty, through the cultivation of the consciousness of great art. Well, our time is up, so I guess we'll have to call more. At this time, I would like to specially thank the many friends who remembered my birthday. I got some delightful cards, some wonderful remembrances and gifts, and I'm very grateful. And I can't thank you all personally, but please accept my most profound appreciation for your kindnesses. I'd like to also announce that on next Sunday morning, we're going to discuss how far we can trust our intuitions. A man told me last Friday that he had a strong hunch that the stock went down. Now, this can happen, so next Sunday morning we will discuss the problem of intuition. On the book table there are some publications that you may find interesting and important. Research on reincarnation, a recent publication. Short talks on many subjects, which is a group of the letters which we wrote to our study groups a number of years ago. There's been interest in them, so we have published them. The astrological philosophy of eclipses. I have had several letters in the last week by individuals who wanted to know whether they should move out of California. I can't really advise it. I think whatever happens, we better stick with it. And anyone interested in my feelings about this problem can find it summarized in these lecture notes. I'd like to also announce our gift shop. There are several new items in which I personally selected, and I think maybe some of you will be interested in them, and for cards for Easter greetings and things of that nature. And also our library. We sort of anticipated the birth of spring in our exhibition for this month, which is devoted to flowers, birds, and other delightful subjects. This exhibition, for your benefit and your own pleasure and enjoyment, we hope you will visit this morning and also look over some of the interesting things we have there. In the library extension downstairs, there are 2 pieces of No prints of the No Theater of Japan. We have one of the finest collections of these prints, I guess, in the United States. And they are very dramatic, representing the sacred theater. And of course, in a way, they're great examples of art because of the tremendous skill and artistry of this particular form of drama. So we hope you will visit there. We have all kinds of things for you to look at if you have the time. We hope you'll have a cup of coffee and share with your friends in a little social meeting, which can also be a fine art of acquaintances and contact. Thank you very much, and hope to see you next week.